It's one of the great stories of history. One of the first stories kids learn in church, but a story that goes beyond faith in terms of influence. It's even part of everyday speech. What is said when a team that is not very good or young or injured gets a shot against the champion? It's David versus Goliath. We know the typical telling. A young Jewish shepherd boy takes on the challenge of a Philistine giant, too small to even wear armor. He takes his leather sling, grabs a few stones from a stream, and then against all odds slays the huge man even as the giant is mocking him. A triumph of courage and faith. But there are other ways to look at it. In his book, God Knows, Joseph Heller of Catch-22 fame takes on David's story, and he has David tell it kind of like this. It was a joke. It wasn't even going to be a fight. I had superior technology and a tactical advantage. I could squash a fly from 50 yards with my sling. No way I was going to miss the melon sitting on top of Goliath's shoulders. And even if I did, the oaf was so slow, I'd just run a few yards and then get another shot. Oh yeah, I made a big show of it. I added some drama. I stopped at the stream on the way to my fight, acted like I was choosing just the right stone, but I already had what I wanted in my pack. So I walked up to him, and I let him yell at me and laugh. It was ridiculously easy. The guy fell like a tree. Now that's just funny. But Heller is reminding us that there are perspectives to a story. David and Goliath has at least four. You've got David's. You've got the perspective of the two armies that were watching the fight, and Goliath's rather brief take on what happened. The perspective that won out, and that is now upheld in Christian and Jewish Sunday schools, was the perspective of the Jewish army, which anointed David the hero of faith that Israel and even God needed. When you look at the Bible, you need to remember perspectives, plural. There are a lot of different ones in there, but there's even more to the Bible than that. First off, it is not one book. The Bible, as Michelle and JJ just taught us, means the books. Actually, an earlier translation would be the scrolls, which of course became books. And if you're in catechism trying to pass notes and stay awake, you often get shown something like this: a bookcase breaking the books of the Bible into categories, like law and history and prophets and wisdom and poetry and so forth. Categories that, well, I think are often pretty ridiculous. I mean, come on, there's gospel in the books of the law, lots of history in many of the books, poetry in almost all of the books, including the Gospels. I mean, most scholars feel the Lord's Prayer is a poem, or at least highly poetic. And of course, there's storytelling in pretty much all of the books. And there are even books within the books. And with that, different perspectives all jumbled together. We've said many times here, Mark's gospel is very much part of, it's in Luke and Matthew, along with a book of sayings that's never been found by scholars, but that scholars have named Q, a book, by the way, that Mark does not seem to be aware of. When we study the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, we use a chart that looks like this. And I know it's microscopic. You can't see it without your magnifying glass. But each one of those columns is one of those first 5 books, even though Leviticus is kind of hidden there. And the colors show you the source. That is the original place where each part of the Bible story comes from. The sources represent different times in history and parts of Jewish society and reflect how those folks told the same stories when oral tradition or storytelling was the only way the Bible existed. Well, eventually someone said, hey, we need to write this stuff down. And so all those traditions, 5 of them here actually, were melded together in a process called redaction. And frankly, this is sometimes more artfully done than others. And if you read the first 5 books, particularly Exodus and Numbers, you'll find spots where it appears that the storyteller, the author, has lost track of where she was in the story or what he just said. The timeline might not be quite right. Or a character will ask a question they already know the answer to. This is not confused writing. It's actually less than great redaction. It's where the quilt, if you will, that is being woven together in our big Bible book from all the old Bible books is frayed a little bit. Now, why would they let this happen? Well, these early people of faith did not view Scripture as a news story. And they didn't want any story lost. For example, we all know David killed Goliath, but in 2 Samuel, a guy named Elihan, I don't really know how to say his name, Elihan, is said to have killed Goliath. And nobody cared. Nobody cared. Nobody writing the Bible down from the oral tradition cared at all. Because all the stories were important. All the stories were valued. And in our just the facts, ma'am, culture, we struggle with that. Which I suppose is why so many accept the notion that the Bible is just one book written exclusively by God and the how-to book for every problem in life, which it really isn't exactly. It's instead the product of probably thousands of people of faith who relayed the oral tradition to one another, and then the folks who put the whole thing together, along with poets and prophets and various writers, and yes, sometimes authors who were writing what they saw, like in the story of David in 2 Samuel. What we need to understand is the Bible is a testament to faith in God. Writings telling us of God's saving acts for God's people, brought to us by inspired people whose hearts burned with faith and wanted faith to be shared. It's a beautiful, sometimes confusing, sometimes a little messy collection that seeks to point to the truth. And sometimes it does a better job of that than others. And if you don't like me saying that, remember, you probably have favorite Bible verses, which should remind us that not all Bible verses are created equal. What we also need to understand is this. Now, this is the word truth, right? Now, if you take your finger and you point to that, point to the truth, does this, your finger, become the truth? Of course not. It's a finger pointing to the truth. The Bible is a finger pointing to the truth. Of course there's truth in there, but not the ultimate truth. The Bible is not God. It's a finger pointing to God. And that's really important because for some of us, the Bible isn't a great help in understanding God. I stopped reading the Bible for a couple of years in college. Frankly, it was confusing me. I was getting lost in the complications. I didn't understand at the time when it was written and how it could be often so brutal. Reading it was actually hurting my faith. So I stopped till I learned more. Until I learned how to see the truth it was conveying and to stop expecting it to be a news story narrated by Walter Cronkite. And that it was okay to live with the parts that might contradict other parts or that just weren't that helpful. The Bible's a big, crazy, complicated, beautiful book of books, and its purpose is to point us to God. to let us know where we come from, to let us know who we belong to. And maybe most of all, it's the story of us, God's family, nurturing our faith through the sometimes different perspectives of our ancestors. With her words, my mother painted a picture of my great-grandfather. A tobacco-spitting, hard cider-making sham of a Baptist Christian who considered bathing optional. Her uncle, late in life, privately pointed to the man's picture and said to me, "Michael, I know what your mother and her sisters say about my father. But let me tell you, he was the greatest man who ever lived." Two perspectives, both holding truth, the truth of my family. Let the Bible be like that for us, our family, as we continue to find God's truth together.